I'm Brandon Vaidyanathan, and this is Beauty at Work, the podcast that seeks to expand our understanding of beauty, what it is, how it works, and why it matters for the work we do. This season of the podcast is sponsored by Templeton Religion Trust and is focused on the beauty and burdens of innovation. Hey everybody, welcome to Beauty at Work. This is the second half of my conversation with Allison Pugh and Lewis Kim. In the first half, we explored the heart of connective labor, what it requires, why it matters, and how pressures towards scripting and quantification and efficiency threaten the moments that generate dignity and belonging. Now we turn to the question that almost every institution is facing today: what happens when AI enters that space? Is AI simply a tool that helps with things like documentation and workflows? Or, as Allison warns, does it risk accelerating a crisis of depersonalization, offering customization in place of personhood? And how should we think about the way AI systems develop non-judgmental technological substitutes that tempt us to bypass difficult emotions like shame? We also will hear from Lewis about his insights from his work with theologians, physicians, and ethicists at the Vatican regarding the forms of presence that no technology should replace. Let's get started. Yeah, I'm curious, Allison, what you might think about that. I mean, I wonder whether there's. I think Lewis, you're right that there is a sense of, it seems, inevitability, in part because we've been trained into a model that is used to this kind of systematization, this sort of depersonalization. But I wonder then whether that which we have taken for granted as the sort of thing that is beyond our control, then just renders us passively, susceptible to being replaced by some of these new forms of automated technologies, right? I mean, yeah, I'm curious, Allison, as to how inevitable do you think it is for these new technologies to take over? I mean, it does seem in some sectors that certainly the pressure is there to say, well, this is better than nothing, and we don't have access to good teachers, so why not create this AI tool? And then once you have that, it'll free up the time of those teachers to then engage with students. And then the pressure will be eventually to say, well, if we're freeing up the teachers' time, then we don't need to pay them. And it seems like an acceleration to the bottom. I wonder just how you're seeing the kind of inevitability here.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I actually think it's too easy to say it's inevitable. I think because also the it is too big and undifferentiated in that sentence. And also, there's certainly technology that has kind of been invented, been pushed upon us, and then failed pretty resoundingly. If technology or kind of Silicon Valley had its way, we would all be wandering around with VR headsets now, and yet we aren't. And that was a real case in which customers kind of said, no, I'm not going to do that, despite all the efforts of, say, Meta or whatever, and other companies that invested many billions of dollars. So I don't think inevitability is always helpful. I do think there are some cases. I think, the sense of inevitability or when a particular technology is inevitable, it's usually because a particular set of circumstances are either impeding customer choice, impeding customer knowledge about what they're choosing, or, they don't get to choose. So, for example, the use of AI scribes is being picked up with alacrity across medicine. I wonder if there's a faster adoption of AI technology out there. And the doctors that I speak to, many, not all, many are like, thank goodness. Oh my God. It is exactly what I need because I spend so much time. I used to spend so much time collecting data. Others, I have heard complaints, how I do my medicine, how I think is in doing the note, and I no longer have that capacity, or, the note that it writes ignores the things that I consider medicine, like all that stuff in the beginning that it considers that is the connective labor. It doesn't consider relevant, so it doesn't put it in. Those are kind of tweaks, I think, that probably engineers could fix. But nonetheless, the adoption of the AI scribe is inevitable. What's also inevitable, because I've talked to, say, chiefs of medicine out there in clinics, is that it's going to involve tightening the screws on doctors once again, because physicians are like, thank God I don't have to spend 2 extra hours, collecting data. But when I've talked to chiefs of medicine, they have said, we're going to give them more people to see.
Yeah.
Like if they, so they're being freed up momentarily, but that's going to result in just adding more patients to their day. So there is some inevitability in that whole process that feels inevitable, partly because the patients aren't the one voting, and the insurance companies and the chiefs of medicine and the way medicine is structured to incentivize on a fee for service basis. It's all about, how much can we load into those days. But inevitability erases or kind of obscures a whole bunch of complex ways in which people can push back. And I see those happening all the time. I see people saying, I'm not going to do that. I'm not participating in that. I'm not, I see a lot of people come to me talking about their worries about the dominance of data collection in their personal feeling relationships and wanting to clear that out. I got an email yesterday from a bureaucrat in Wisconsin who said, I'm actually in charge of watching over all these social workers. And I just read your book, and I see that it's actually in my power how much we make them keep track of things. And can you help me figure out how to do less of that? And so I just want to say inevitability is too broad a brush, and that there's definitely counter movements, both in the systematizing and data analytics side and in the technology and AI side. Finally, I would just say we are in a crazy moment in which there is basically zero regulation in the United States around AI. And that is going to change. That is not it feels inevitable because the only one who's talking are the people who would have $60 billion aiming at marketing it to you. But actually, this is going to change. It's not going to be the way it's going to be forever. It's just like, when cars were invented and everyone was driving wherever, there was an entire infrastructure that was developed to make cars safer and to, license the whole stratosphere about how we operate vehicles. I can imagine a similar kind of apparatus of, regulation and use that will build up around these new tools.
Yeah, no, that's great. I know that's hopeful in terms of what sort of agency we can employ. And my
Brandon,
concern,
can I just add a qualifying comment on the word inevitable?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to drill down on it so much. I just
it's an important. I think it sparks an important dialogue. Inevitable doesn't mean one should be resigned to whatever happens. There are two aspects of inevitability that I was referring to. One is with any system that scales, going from a craftsperson's studio to a factory, there are inevitable effects of that. And being attendant to that, I think, is helpful then to figure out what to do about it. One of the things I get a little worried about in some of the forums that I'm in is with the onslaught of technology and the scale, there is kind of the siege and bunker mentality that just points backward to, what are we losing? What do we need to preserve? It's just not very productive. In 1990, the Vatican issued documents on what do we do about the internet? You can look it up. They're quite quaint. They were just off the mark in terms of kind of where we are. And so it's just not very productive. I think the other thing about inevitability with regards to just human behavior, and I go back to this kind of moral formation, and I think Allison sort of touched upon it, is there always are things that people can do and stand up and sort of, resist or do something a little bit better. But it's important to know what are the larger forces that will drive an industry or society, regardless of kind of what we do, there's a certain set of changes that will happen. So I don't mean to imply resignation and surrender.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose
Ooh, I
my
have one more
concern.
thing to say,
Oh, sorry.
Brandon.
Yeah,
I'm
sure,
sorry.
yeah. Please, yeah.
um, Recently, I was looking into this opportunity in Berlin. And in doing so, I did a little bit of research about what kind of stories, what kind of AI is happening in Germany. And I came upon a company, a set of companies actually, that are producing AI that actually requires humans to collaborate. And it struck me that the way AI is being invented in the United States reflects the culture that is kind of dominant here, and may the again, I'm kind of taking issue with the inevitability of scientific progress and thinking about the ways in which culture actually shapes the progress that we are given. So when I hear about, like, for instance, those chatbots that are the subject of a lawsuit, when you have kids that have committed suicide with the help of the chatbot, who had one of those, I've read through the transcripts, and one of them, the chatbot says, "Let me be the one who truly sees you," essentially not your mother or not your family. And the idea that the chatbot, becomes the individual that like replaces the humans is, I think, the chatbot version that's coming out of Silicon Valley today. But that's research I was doing in Germany, just perusing what's available out there, was really interesting in that there are other ways in which to use chatbot technology that actually invited the people to collaborate. So it wasn't about replacing humans. It was actually about putting humans in conversation with each other, which I thought was quite novel. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks. I mean, I think that resonates. It seems with some of the work, Louis, that you're doing with the Vatican on AI and healthcare. And I want to ask you about this, the sort of what you call the irreducible encounter principle that you all have been developing. But I also want to ask whether, just on this inevitability point, whether the folks who are really capable of not resigning themselves to this, whether there is a dimension of class or power or affluence there. Like, are we moving towards a world in which the only people who could really resist are the people who are, like the kids of Steve Jobs and so on, who don't have to use the iPads, whereas the kids in the less privileged schools are going to be forced to use these technologies, right? So there's a level at which it seems the people who might really be capable of receiving genuine human encounter would be the more affluent, and then those who are not, so privileged will have to just deal with, automated technologies and that. But I'm wondering similarly with healthcare, Louis, whether there might be similar effects, and whether if you could tell us a little bit about your group with the Builders AI Forum, and how you might be discussing this relationship between new technologies and human dignity, and where you might see signs of hope and genuine avenues for innovation that could be in service of human flourishing.
Yeah, and just for the audience not familiar with the forum that Rand is referring to, so about a month ago, there was an AI theology forum in Rome, 200 attendees, and then there were 6 workshops, and then there was a healthcare workshop that I co-facilitated. We had 20 practitioners. We had physicians, theologians, health insurance executives, ethics professors, and we worked over 7 or 8 hours over 2 days, wrestling with what are the key issues with AI and healthcare. And we ended up converging on this question of what would be the final roles of humans with AI getting more and more powerful. And we ended up with some criteria that were very similar to what Allison came up with, which is situations where you need a kind of final discernment, an authority, a divine mediation. And it's obviously a Catholic forum, where non-impersonation is really critical. Even if a technology appeared human, the patient needed to know this is not a human. And then we tried to encapsulate all this into a word that was, similar to what you see in Catholic social teaching. And we came up with this phrase called the irreducible encounter. And we kind of made this fake sort of paragraph that the Vatican is free to use if they want. What we were ultimately, some of the questions that we were wrestling with is, in a human-to-human relationship, how much is what a patient perceives is actually a projection in their own mind, and how much does it really reflect something that really is going on between two embodied entities? And there's a lot of debate on that. So then we also had a practical debate. What if technology advances to where you could have a hospital with no humans at all, but it will allow you to deploy at a very low cost healthcare facilities in a developing country? Let's say you could do 100. But if someone says, an ethicist says, no, you need a person or two, okay, well, then the cost of that hospital goes up. You can only do 20. What would you do? How would you approach that? Or if you have a nursing home and there's no one that can visit that nursing home or an elder care facility, but you have an AI robot that could be like an AI chaplain, would you allow that? And I would say, I'll just make one comment. The debate sort of fell along what your timeline was. So we had a lot of strong people, strong voices, ethicists that said, the fact that we have to make that kind of trade-off reflects a breakdown in our society. So Allison had this in her book, which is if you sort of surrender to that kind of trade-off, you're allowing sort of the misallocation of labor and costs that have resulted in that situation. So that's one argument. But that doesn't help the individual who has a grandmother in a facility across the country who isn't being visited by anyone except for maybe one caregiver every other week, who would appreciate a little robot to chat with. So one conclusion that we had is, as we talk about these issues, we have a high level set of principles that people can maybe agree on, but we really have to have very, very contextual and specific cases to talk about to sort of further draw out, what do you do in these situations?
Yeah, thank you. Allison, I wonder if you might have a response, and then I'd love to have some time for you to ask any questions you might have of each other, actually.
Oh, well, thank you. My question for Louis was actually about the irreducible encounter principle and kind of how right now it seems it's of course a voluntary principle. So I just kind of wonder how to propagate it more. I thought it was a beautiful idea and really interesting, the different components about it. Speaking to what, you pithily captured, like, yes, we can say that the existence of those situations of the like kind of lonely elder person who has nobody to take care of them reflects all sorts of problems before that moment that led to the creation of that moment, of that person's predicament. But that doesn't help the individual, say their adult child who's living across the country who really wishes that they could just have something that would give them some comfort. So I totally get those two sides, if they're sides exactly. I agree with both of them. But the problem that I see, that I'm sure your group came to, was that if you resolve the individual's problem, you kind of bake into the ground, you rigidify the situation that you have solved. So, if we kind of allay, if we use better than nothing as a principle to allocate the AI that's streaming out of Silicon Valley and other places right now, then you're baking into you're baking the existing inequalities that become better than nothing, and that need better than nothing responses. Yeah.
The one response, by the way, I found one of the things many things I found helpful in your book was your taxonomy. So, better than nothing, better than human, and better together.
Yeah.
There's a risk in that someone from the outside is applying those labels to a very particular situation that's very specific to, let's say, the adult children of the situation. What if for the situation, grandmother, she would say, it's not better than nothing, it's better than a human. And I've got 6 months to live, and all right, So I think one caution I would have is that we can apply those labels from the outside. They may not be applicable in very specific cases. And I understand kind of what you're saying. I think you're making a slippery slope argument. And it is a danger. And there's a lot of cases where acceptance of one little accommodation for technology sort of sets a standard. We see it with phones and social media. It's a legitimate danger. But I would also caution how we apply those labels from the outside.
Sure. Yeah, I hear you. I think the danger is less when individuals do it than when policymakers do it. And I see that happening in policymaking all the time.
And yes, this particular technology that I'm talking to, I don't want to name it, has been purchased en masse by a particular state.
Yeah.
To deal
with.
So
that does worry me when policymakers are like, let's just solve this immediate issue.
Well, but then if you talk to the policymaker, and I've heard him interviewed, this person interviewed, he has data on who is alone, and it's not meant to be sort of a blanket sort of panacea. We could all go down this issue forever. I do want to honor and recognize something that I thought Allison's book was ultimately pointing to that ties to the irreducible encounter, which goes back to my earlier comment, which is we could debate forever, is AI better or worse or something, altogether, but it sort of misses I think one of the points that I kind of took away from Allison's book, which is beyond any sort of functional or utilitarian debate, there is an ontological issue of what does it mean to be a human in front of another human. And it goes beyond rationality. And sometimes just, scenario, imagine someone is dying, has no one to visit them. It's the middle of the night. It's going to be the final night, the final breath. And someone shows up. This person that's dying is unconscious, doesn't perceive anybody there. This person shows up in the middle of the night and is present for that final breath and leaves anonymously. Beyond, obviously, the patient doesn't know this has happened. The person that showed up is going to receive really no gratification. I mean, no signal back, maybe some self-affirmation of self-satisfaction, but even that's kind of dangerous. But something about that encounter seen from above, to me, is beautiful, it's human, and necessary. That, to me, is the last human job. And then thinking about, okay, well, what is it about that is worth preserving? I think is a more interesting discussion, or an interesting discussion.
Interesting. I mean, I'd be reading that book, but I have to say I am more compelled by interactions where both people are conscious, and partly because I think it has implications not only for what the psychologists have already documented about individual well-being, both of the seer and the seen, but also because of their community impacts. And I think even with implications for democracy. So that's really where I live more than, but I understand and share your interest in, kind of the power of seeing the other even when they don't know it.
I think, I agree with you that in practically speaking, the human to human live interaction is important. That's why, I've made this pivot vocationally. The example that I just drew out is more of a thought experiment to help tease out, what is essentially human. I did have one question for you, Allison, on another thought experiment sort of teases out principles. I thought about that movie Castaway with Tom Hanks and the volleyball Wilson. And I actually put this in ChatGPT. Like I did a summary of your book, and then I described Wilson or referred to Wilson, and I said, what's the difference here? And
not much. I mean, Wilson is AI essentially.
Well,
because there's no other person there.
Yeah. Well, it did point to something that I said earlier, which is I think about pen pals when we were growing up. You're writing to someone you haven't met, you get a letter. It does point to this phenomena that a lot of our relationships really are projections of what is really a chatter in our own mind about another person and what we imagine about another person. We often get it wrong. And so in many of the examples that I was reading in your book about this human-to-human relationship, I was just wondering how much of that is a projection of the receiver onto the other. How much will AI eventually be able to generate cues to instigate some of those sort of projected responses? It is a question that came up for me.
So I feel like AI is already doing that. I mean, that's why we talk about the sycophant problem, where they're just kind of reflecting. It's very good at reflecting back at whatever the other person wants. So the beauty, the actual painful, paradoxical beauty of interacting with another human being is its kind of total unpredictability, and that you can't know what the other person is going to say. And they're going to try and reflect, and it's not going to be perfect. They're going to, kind of get it wrong. You're going to be like, that's not quite right. It's more like this. Yeah. They're going to say, oh, well, maybe, like that dance of seeing each other, making mistakes, coming to some kind of okay, constructed somewhere in the middle that still has some misrecognition in it, but you feel seen a little, like it's not a binary. It's not like, yes, I feel seen. No, I don't feel seen. It is a messy, chaotic process whose the beauty of which is in the messiness. And that's where I would go with this. What I think is most interesting about AI is not better than nothing. I think that's like a tragic story about our political, kind of ineptitude, our inability to solve political problems. And so we want to throw technology at it. I'm not interested in the better than nothing because I don't think that's a good path. But I think the better than human, by which I meant kind of how we handle shame, and how we handle vulnerability, how we handle conflict. That's more interesting to me and also more challenging, because who will ask you who can ask someone to suffer shame? Who can say, no, you need to have shame in front of another human being? There are many people who opt for the chatbot, opt for the webinar, opt for the electronic teacher, because they don't want to feel shame in front of another human being. And I respect that. I think I understand that. And at the same time, I make arguments against it. And I'm thinking about making this my next book, thinking about people who persevere through shame with another human being when there is a technological exit option. I think that's interesting, because I do think, as many therapists told me, you can get through shame, and there's something that's very powerful about getting through that in front of another human being. But that's to me the argument that's the most powerful about what AI has to offer. And maybe the most positive use case is a kind of combination where people kind of work through shame and then come to human interactions or something like that. So anyway, there's lots of different ways to kind of develop that iteration, but it's the better than human with regard to shame, vulnerability, and, kind of conflict or loneliness being the things that are emotional trouble. That I think is the most interesting and the most fraught and challenging uses of AI.
Allison, is there a movie that represents some of the beautiful and poignant aspects of a human interaction that you're just describing? I have one. That's why I was bringing it up.
I'm not sure. Why don't you tell me what you're thinking of, and then I'll think.
Arctic.
I don't think I've seen it.
I'm not familiar. No.
Yeah. But I'm going to write it down.
Yeah. I kept thinking about it reading your book. It's about a rescue by a helicopter pilot in the Arctic who himself had been stranded. And so he's awaiting rescue, and another helicopter appears and just happens to crash. And one of the two pilots is killed, and the surviving pilot is injured. And the first pilot has to make a decision. Do I try to make this long trek and find safety? Otherwise, this other pilot's going to die. And it's this long, kind of tortuous sort of experience of care for a stranger. And it's some really touching moments. And, it goes beyond rationality. A robot probably would not have made that trek. It's, I don't want to pronounce the actor's name. I can't pronounce it, but it's a beautiful movie. So you would always
Yeah, thanks, Lewis, and thanks, Allison, too, for the points you raised. I mean, I just wonder, one of the challenges is just the temptation for us to bypass a lot of the necessary growth, right? I think you talked somewhere about shame as a knot that has to be massaged, and it's, like Sherry Turkle talks about, just the general basic awkwardness of being on a date with a stranger is like so. It's so difficult now for the some of the present generation that there isn't a sense that you have to grow through this, and there's no good shortcut. Like, we just have to go through that. We just have to go through those moments of the awkwardness of dealing with, someone's funeral and not knowing what to say, and being silent in the face of this immeasurable loss. I mean, there's no real technological shortcut, and sure, certainly technologies could help us to, give us different perspectives maybe, but ultimately if they're not pushing us towards that mutuality, towards that connection, and they're substituting for it, then it's a failure. And I think the temptation is going to be very strong to use it for failure. And I don't quite know. Maybe if I could just ask you both a last question. I know since we're over time, but I mean, if we could make, a policy decision like today, in 2025, and then suppose we're in 2040 and we look back and say that we were able to make a policy decision correctly that was able to safeguard human dignity and connect the sort of, particularly the dignity of connective labor, and the sort of the vitality of human belonging, what might that decision have been?
Such a good question. Okay, so I'll tell you, I've been invited by a public policy school to come and give a talk, and I said to them, how about you have me come and talk to a grad seminar who's assigned my book, and then they can come help me come up with a 10-point policy agenda that 10 legislative things for the last human job and a connective labor future. So I'm already thinking, like, I just have an easy one that I think actually I saw that Lewis also, I mean, it's captured in the irreducible encounter principle conversation, which is about transparency, because people have to, right now, you do not have to know, like a customer, I mean, an organization does not have to tell you when they are employing AI. And that drives me batty. I want to know so that people can choose. Because right now they can't choose. And that's kind of a silencing in our capitalist environment. So, but that feels just like a baby step. And I want to be able to kind of have a better list for you. But that to me is, I would say, the first and the smallest first step that we need to take right this second.
Thank you.
I agree. We call it non-impersonation. Our requirements. I think, decades from now, it's hard to predict what policy measures will be helpful. And I think there's a danger in applying value judgments that in the end contextually are not accurate. But transparency is kind of a binary thing. Like, we should label things correctly, let people decide what they want to do with it. And I think labeling something as a human or non-human, no matter how human-like it would be my vote.
Yeah, no, wonderful. Yeah, intriguingly, the question actually came from a gentleman I met at a cafe while I was reading your book, Allison, and he runs data centers, and so he's been really thinking about your book in relation to this scaling operation that he's embroiled in, which is very profitable, of course, but what are the unintended consequences they're going to cause, and how can people even in the technology space who are heavily invested in the promotion of these new technologies keep in mind the centrality of what you've so helpfully laid out. So, thanks again so much, really, to both of you. This has been really, absolutely fantastic. I really, really enjoyed this. I've been really edified by this. So thanks for taking the time. And and I hope it generates some useful.
Can I just say for your audience, there's a lot of AI books right now, and it will grow. I think Allison's book is really important. It could have been written pre-AI. I think in the world of AI, it raises some very important issues. It's very detailed and it's grounded on a lot of real interviews. I'm not just saying that because Allison is here, but I think it's an important book. I'll be recommending it to people in my world.
Please allow me to say thank you so much to you both. I'm so honored by your kind of deep engagement in the book, and I've learned a lot even from this conversation. So I really appreciate your time and thoughtfulness here.
Thank you both. All right, folks, that's a wrap for this episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with someone who would find it of interest. Also, please subscribe and leave us a review if you haven't already. Thanks, and see you next time.